I framed up for you a rather simple proposition, and that is the U.S. Constitution says that we have to count the people in the United States every year. And the primary purpose of that, although they use the census for a lot of stuff now that's not in the Constitution, was to reapportion districts and decide, how do we make the congressional districts throughout the United States so that every congressperson represents, it's just under 800,000 people each. Now, see, I'm far less knowledgeable about this than Hans von Spakovsky, who's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation and was on the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, which could have done a whole bunch of work if the states had allowed them to. Unfortunately, that's a story for another day. Hans, welcome back to the program.
Sure, thanks for having me back.
Every time I see that Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, I think, boy, if you'd really been able to dig into it, a lot of bad things wouldn't have happened in places like Detroit, Michigan, and Atlanta, Georgia. But, I guess we'll have to take another shot after this is all over. But how about this question of whether or not the census can exclude illegal aliens when we're counting? Because all the Trump administration asked for was do the census, but make sure you identify who is here legally, citizens, green card holders, that sort of thing, and who is not here legally, and give us the count for both so that we don't end up, and I've framed this to my audience, saying if California, say, has an extra 4 million illegal aliens in it, in addition to citizens who are there, we might give them 4, maybe even 5 extra members of Congress and 4 or 5 extra electoral college votes. This has a real consequence on how America is governed, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and you framed it exactly right. And, in fact, that is the case that was being argued before the Supreme Court on Monday because Donald Trump sent a directive to the Census Bureau this past summer saying that when you send me the population that is to be used for apportionment, exclude illegal aliens. And under federal law, what happens is there's a formula, apportionment formula that's applied to that base population, and then that says how many representatives in the U.S. House each state has. And, they got the usual injunction from a lower court saying, the president couldn't do this. But, in fact, he can do it. And the reason is that there's an earlier U.S. Supreme Court case from 1992 in which the Supreme Court said that the executive branch can determine who is an inhabitant or who is a usual resident of a state. And, for example, Lars, we have never included, and the states that have sued the president don't even challenge it, they've never included tourists or other aliens who are here temporarily, legally in the country, but just temporarily here as tourists or on business. And nobody disputes that we don't need to count them for apportionment purposes. Well, look, if we don't count aliens who are here legally, temporarily, why in the world would we have to count aliens who are here illegally? Particularly because they're also only temporarily here. Why? Well, because they can be picked up at any time by the federal government and deported.
Well, the other thing, and I don't know if this has a legal basis, but Hans, I've asked people, do you think people who are not citizens should be able to vote? And the common answer from an average person with no law degree would say, well, of course not. They can't vote. I say, well, if they can't vote, right, why are they entitled to representation? Let me throw another example at you. And again, I'm the non-lawyer, so I throw all kinds of crazy stuff at Hans, and he puts up with it. But, for example, Manhattan, as I understand it, has literally hundreds of thousands of people who come into the city during the day, and then they leave the city at night. I would think it was just as crazy to suggest counting illegal aliens as it would be to say, well, if Manhattan's population increases by a couple of 100,000 during the day, or, say 700,000 during the day, they should get an extra congressman because for, a big part of the business day, they're a much bigger population until everybody gets in their cars and on the trains and the subways and they go back home. And you say, no, you count them back in their real home. Well, that's what I want to do with illegal aliens. If they want to be counted, they can be counted in Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras and Vietnam and Canada and every other place that illegal aliens come from, but they don't get to be counted for purposes of representation in the Congress.
No, they shouldn't. And look, in addition to what you said, Lars, about if you ask people, should illegal alien be able to vote, everybody says no. Well, here's here's two other questions that I ask people, and they always say no, which is, do you think an illegal alien should be able to run for Congress? And everybody says, oh, of course not. So then you say, okay, well, do you think an illegal alien should be able to make a cash or political donation to somebody running for Congress? And again, people say, well, of course not. Well, look, if they can't vote, can't run, can't be a candidate, can't make a political donation, why in the world would we include them in the apportionment process when we are figuring out how much political power each state is going to have in the U.S. House of Representatives? It makes no sense.
Well, and in fact, you raised something else that I think has a legal angle to it. There was a time when America counted some people as 3/5 of a person. And you know, it's not a proud time for America, but we counted them as part of a person. What you just described, a person who's entitled to be counted for purposes of representation, but is not entitled to vote and is not entitled to run for office, that would be, under the Constitution, that'd be a partial citizen, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, look, children can't vote, but as long as they're citizens, I mean, they are entitled to representation, and therefore.
But they can't run for Congress, can they? They can't vote, and they also can't.
They can't.
But they will be able to.
Yes, at some point in the future. Look, the whole problem, of course, with this is, and this was clear from the oral arguments on Monday before the court, is that. You know, the questions were being asked by the court were that maybe this case is not yet ripe to be decided. And by that, what some of the justices seemed to be saying was, we don't even know yet whether the Census Bureau is going to be able to give the president a population figure that has the number of illegal aliens in it, because they were, of course, handicapped by the fact that last year the Supreme Court, with Chief Justice Roberts unfortunately joining the liberals, said, well, you can't have a citizenship question on the census, even though we've had that going back to the 1820 census. So we don't know yet whether we'll be able to get accurate information on the number of illegal aliens, although the administration said in their arguments that they can, because the federal government, all these other administrative agencies, have so much information about the population of the United States that they say they can do it.
They can do it. And besides, prospectively, shouldn't the Supreme Court say this one's ripe because we're going to have another census in less than 10 years, and we're going to need to count it then? And the Supreme Court does do some things prospectively in some sense, because Miranda never got advised of his rights. But the Supreme Court decided every future person who hasn't been arrested yet is entitled to be advised at that point. Should every future census be able to count both citizens and non-citizens for the purposes of representation? Otherwise, according to Yale, we have somewhere between 22 and 30 million illegal aliens here. That's 30 or 40 members of Congress, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. In fact, the Congressional Research Service actually did an interesting study just a couple of years ago. They said, well, what would have happened if in 2010, instead of using the total population of the U.S. to do apportionment, we would have used the citizen population of the U.S., and if we had, California would lose 4 members of Congress, Texas, Florida, New York would each lose 1 member of Congress, and 7 states would each have gained a member of Congress: Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Virginia. So those states, those 7 states, they all were cheated. They were all cheated of a congressional representative because non-citizens were included in the apportionment process after the last census.
That's Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. Hans, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.